The wind was sharp that night, cutting through the narrow streets like a knife. Neon signs flickered in the distance, their cold light mixing with the fog that curled between the buildings. It was late, and most of the alien city had gone quiet. But in one corner, in front of a large steel gate, there was noise. The gate swung open with a loud creak, and a small figure was shoved out into the freezing air. She stumbled, almost falling onto the icy ground. Behind her, a tall alien woman, with cruel eyes, stood in the doorway. "Get out," the woman hissed. Her voice sharp like broken glass. "You are nothing but trouble. I don't want to see you again." The small figure and alien girl didn't answer. She just stood there, clutching the thin piece of cloth she had over her shoulders. Her legs trembled, not only from the cold, but from fear. The steel gate closed with a loud bang. Sealing her out, for a moment, she just stared at it, her breath turning into small clouds in the air. Her home, if she could call it, that was gone. Her stepmother had finally done it. Thrown her out like trash, she turned and looked at the street ahead. The wind pushed against her, making her shiver harder. Her feet were bare, the icy pavement biting into her skin. She started walking slowly, not knowing where to go. Shadows moved in the corners of the alleyways. Stray creatures rummaged through garbage piles, their glowing eyes. Following her, she hugged herself tightly, her lips trembling. "I'll be good, I promise. Please." "Someone," she whispered, her voice almost lost to the wind. Far away, footsteps echoed. A man was walking alone, his coat collar turned up. He was human, tall, with a face that carried the weight of years. He didn't belong in this part of the alien city. Humans were rare here, and most stayed close to the safer districts. But he had his reasons he didn't like to talk about. His eyes scanned the street, alert for trouble. That was when he saw her, a small shape in the shadows, moving slowly like she could collapse at any second. He stopped, watching her from a distance. She was thin, her hair tangled, her clothes torn, even from far away. He could see she was shaking. He thought about walking past, minding his own business. Alien matters were dangerous, and getting involved could mean trouble, but something about the way she moved, the way she kept glancing over her shoulder, it pulled at him. He took a step forward. The girl noticed and froze, her eyes wide. He raised his hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. "Hey, are you all right?" he asked, his voice calm. She didn't answer. He stepped closer. Her first instinct was to back away. She had been told humans were dangerous, that they took what they wanted, but his eyes didn't look cruel. They looked concerned. "You're freezing," he said, taking off his coat. "Here, take this." She shook her head, clutching her thin cloth tighter. He didn't push, just kept holding the coat out. Finally, after a long moment, she stepped forward and let him wrap it around her. The warmth was shocking. She hadn't felt it in days. She looked up at him, her lips parting like she wanted to say something but couldn't. Then she whispered, "Be my dad. I won't misbehave." The words hit him like a blow. He blinked, unsure if he had heard right. She stared at him, her eyes wet, desperate. No one had ever asked him that before. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Then he nodded slowly. "Come on, kid. Let's get you somewhere warm." He glanced around. Two shadowy figures stood at the far end of the street, watching trouble. He put a hand on the girl's shoulder, guiding her away quickly. The wind howled behind them as they disappeared into the maze of streets. Somewhere in the darkness, the shadowy figures began to follow. The human walked fast, his hand gently guiding the small alien girl. The streets were darker here, narrow and filled with the smell of damp stone. He glanced over his shoulder. The two shadowy figures were still there, keeping their distance. The girl noticed too and held onto his coat sleeve tightly. Her eyes darted between the strangers and the man. unsure which of them she should fear more. "Where are we going?" she asked quietly, her voice shaking. "Somewhere safe," he replied without slowing down. She hesitated, her steps slowing for a moment. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. He didn't even know the real reason himself. Maybe it was the way she had said, "Be my dad." Maybe it was because he saw something in her eyes he had seen before in his own reflection. "What's your name?" he asked instead. She looked at the ground, avoiding his eyes. "Lyra," she said softly. "All right, Lyra," he said. "I'm Daniel." The name sounded strange to her ears. She had met only a few humans before, and they never stayed long. In her part of the city, most were merchants or travelers, and none ever stopped to speak to someone like her. They turned into a side street where the air was warmer. The smell of cooked food drifting from somewhere nearby. The sight of a small diner with glowing windows made Lyra's stomach twist with hunger. Daniel noticed the way she looked at it. "When was the last time you ate?" he asked. She shrugged, not wanting to admit it had been 2 days. He sighed and steered her toward the diner's door. Inside, the warmth hit her like a blanket. The alien owner looked at Daniel suspiciously, but said nothing when he pointed to an empty corner table. Lyra slid into the seat, her small hands gripping the edge of the table. Daniel ordered 2 bowls of hot soup. When it arrived, she stared at it for a moment like it was something unreal. "Go on," Daniel encouraged. She picked up the spoon and began to eat. At first carefully, then faster. The warmth of the soup spread through her body, making her feel alive again. Daniel leaned back, watching her. "Lyra, why was your stepmother so eager to throw you out?" he asked. Her spoon slowed. She doesn't like me," she said quietly. "She says I cost too much to keep, and she wants to sell the house without me there." Daniel frowned. "That's not a reason to abandon a child," he said. She glanced at him, almost as if she was checking to see if he truly believed that. He could see the doubt in her eyes. The way she had been told over and over that she was worthless, he wanted to tell her she was wrong. But before he could speak, the bell above the diner door rang. The 2 shadowy figures walked in. Scanning the room, Daniel's jaw tightened. They spotted him immediately and began to move toward the table. Lyra froze, her spoon halfway to her mouth. The first man stopped just short of the table. "Hand her over," he said, his voice deep and cold. "She belongs to her stepmother." The second added. Daniel leaned forward slowly, his voice calm but firm. "She's not going anywhere with you." The 2 exchanged a look. Then one of them leaned closer. "You don't understand, human. This isn't your business." Daniel's hand rested on the table, close to his pocket. He had no weapon. "But they didn't need to know that. It became my business the moment you started following us," he said. The tension in the air grew heavier. The diner owner shifted uncomfortably, but didn't interfere. The first man smiled thinly. "You can't protect her forever," he said, and with that, they turned and walked out. Lyra's hands were shaking. "They'll tell her," she whispered. Daniel looked at her seriously. "Then we need to make sure they can't find you," he said. He paid for the food and led her out through the back door into a narrow alley. The smell of rain and metal filled the air. They walked quickly, avoiding the main roads. Lyra kept glancing behind them, afraid the men would reappear. "Daniel," she said after a while, "will you really be my dad?" The question stopped him in his tracks. He turned to look at her, the streetlight catching the reflection in her eyes. "You don't even know me," he said. She shook her head. "I know you're the only one who didn't walk past me." The words cut deep. Daniel had no answer, so he simply nodded and started walking again. By the time they reached the quieter part of the city, the night had grown colder. The streets were empty, the air heavy with silence. Daniel stopped in front of a small, worn building. "This is my place," he said. unlocking the door inside. It was warm and smelled faintly of wood and old books. Lyra stepped in cautiously, her eyes moving over the small living room, the couch. The shelves lined with strange human objects. "You can sleep here tonight," Daniel said, pointing to the couch. She nodded. Still clutching his coat tightly, for the first time in days, she felt like she might actually be safe. But outside, far down the street, the two shadowy figures were still watching, and Daniel knew this was only the beginning. The door clicked shut behind them, shutting out the cold and the distant hum of the alien city. Inside, the light was soft, warm, and strangely comforting. Lyra stood just inside the doorway, her bare feet sinking into the worn carpet. Her eyes darted around, taking in the shelves stacked with books, the small wooden table, and the faint smell of something that reminded her of safety. Daniel hung his coat by the door, leaving her still wrapped in the heavier one he had given her. "You're safe here," he said quietly. She didn't reply, only hugged the coat. Tighter around herself, Daniel moved to the small kitchen area, pulling open a cupboard. "Hungry again?" he asked without looking at her. She hesitated, then nodded. He set a pot on the stove, pouring in some broth and adding vegetables. The smell began to fill the air, making her stomach twist with hunger. She sat slowly on the couch, still glancing toward the window like she expected someone to burst in. "Do you live alone?" she asked after a while. Daniel paused, the spoon in his hand still. "Yes," he said finally. "Just me." There was a weight in his voice that made her want to ask more, but she stayed silent. When the food was ready, Daniel brought 2 bowls to the low table. They sat across from each other, the steam curling between them. Lyra picked up her spoon and began to eat, her movements quick and careful. Daniel watched her for a moment before speaking. "You don't have to look over your shoulder here," he said. Her eyes lifted to meet his, but there was doubt in them. "My stepmother." "She has people," Lyra whispered. "They find things." "They find people." Daniel's jaw tightened. "She won't find you tonight," he said firmly. For a short while, they ate in silence. Outside, the wind rattled the window, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed when the bowls were empty. Daniel took them to the sink. "You should rest," he said. "I can't." She replied softly, "When I close my eyes, I see her face." Daniel came back and sat in the chair across from her. "She can't hurt you here," he said. "But if you want, you can stay awake, and we'll talk." Lyra's small hands twisted the edge of the coat. "Why did you stop for me?" she asked. Daniel leaned back, looking at the ceiling for a moment before answering. "Because once, a long time ago, I needed someone to stop for me." She tilted her head. "Did they?" He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No," he said. "That's why I did." The warmth of the room began to relax her shoulders, but her mind still buzzed with fear. She wanted to believe she was safe, but she knew her stepmother's reach. Suddenly, a sharp knock hit the door. Both of them froze. Daniel's eyes moved to the window. A shadow passed in front of it, slow and deliberate. He motioned for her to stay quiet. The knock came again, louder this time. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. He stood, moving toward the door silently. "Who is it?" he called out, his voice steady. A deep voice answered. "We just want the girl, human. Give her to us, and we'll leave." Lyra's heart pounded. In her chest, Daniel gripped the doorframe. "You've got the wrong address," he said. There was silence for a moment. Then a scraping sound like claws dragging over the metal door. "We'll come back," the voice said, before footsteps moved away. Daniel waited until the sound faded completely before locking the extra bolt. Lyra was trembling. "They know you have me now," she said. Daniel came back to the couch and crouched down so he was at her eye level. "Then we'll make it harder for them," he said. "I'm not letting them take you back." The rest of the night was restless. Daniel sat in the chair by the door, keeping watch while Lyra curled up on the couch. Every creak of the building made her flinch. At one point she whispered, "You'll still be here in the morning, right?" Daniel nodded. "I'm not going anywhere." By the time dawn began to touch the city with pale light, both of them were still awake. The streets outside were quiet now, but Daniel knew the silence wouldn't last. He made a decision, staying. "Here was too dangerous. We need to move you somewhere they can't find you," he said. Lyra looked up, her eyes wide. "Where?" "I know a place," he replied, "but it's not close. And it's not easy to get to." She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay," she said softly, "as long as you're there." Daniel grabbed a small bag, stuffing in food, water, and a blanket. Lyra stood by the door, clutching his coat around her small frame. When they stepped outside, the cold hit them again, but the streets were nearly empty, somewhere in the shadows. Unseen eyes watched them leave, and as Daniel led her away, the feeling grew stronger. This was only the start of something far bigger than either of them had planned. The streets were waking up slowly. Shops were opening their shutters. Steam rose from food stalls, and tired workers shuffled toward their jobs. Daniel kept his head down as he guided Lyra through the quieter lanes, avoiding the crowded markets. Where news spread fast, her small hand clung to his sleeve, afraid that if she let go, she would be lost again. They walked for almost an hour, weaving through the old parts of the city. The buildings here were older, walls cracked, and the air carried the faint scent of rust. Daniel knew these streets well, and more importantly, he knew which ones to avoid. Finally, they reached his friend's workshop. A narrow building squeezed between two warehouses. The metal door opened with a long creak. Inside, the air was warm, filled with the scent of oil and metal shavings. A heavy-set alien man with mechanical goggles looked up from his workbench. "Daniel," he grunted. "It's been a while." Daniel nodded, pulling Lyra forward. "Yarrow, I need a place to keep her safe for a bit." Yarrow's eyes flicked to the girl, then back to Daniel. "Safe from what?" he asked. "From people who want to take her," Daniel replied, his tone firm. Yarrow frowned. "You know trouble follows you, human," he said. But after a moment, he waved them inside. Lyra sat on a crate while Daniel spoke quietly with Yarrow. In the corner, she caught only bits of the conversation, words like stepmother, enforcers, and find her fast. Her heart sank. She wanted to believe this man, Daniel, could protect her. But what if even he couldn't? She was tired of running, but she knew they couldn't stop now. The sound of footsteps outside made everyone freeze. Daniel moved to the window, peering through the dusty glass. Two figures stood in the alley, scanning the building. It was them. "Same enforcers from the diner. They found us," Daniel muttered. Yarrow swore under his breath and grabbed a wrench. "They can't just walk in here," he said. But Daniel shook his head. "They don't need to. They can wait until we leave." The enforcers began knocking on the metal door, each hit echoing through the workshop. "Open up." One shouted, "We know you're in there, human." Lyra shrank back, her eyes wide. Daniel stepped toward the door, but didn't open it. "She's not yours," he called out. "Go back and tell her stepmother she's not getting her back." There was silence for a moment, then a cold laugh from the other side. "You think you can keep her? You'll regret this." The knocking stopped, but Daniel didn't relax. "They'll wait nearby," he said to Yarrow. "We can't stay here." Yarrow nodded reluctantly. "I can give you a place to hide down by the old docks." Daniel agreed, knowing it would be harder for them to track her there. He grabbed the small bag he'd packed earlier and motioned for Lyra to follow. They slipped out the back of the workshop, moving quickly through a maze of crates and narrow alleys. The air smelled of salt now, the distant sound of waves hitting the shore growing louder. Lyra tried to keep up, her small legs working hard to match his pace. Every time she glanced back, she expected to see the enforcers right behind them, But for the moment, they were alone when they reached the docks. Daniel led her into an abandoned storage building. The place was dusty, with broken windows and the faint creak of wooden beams overhead. "This will do for now," he said, spreading out the blanket in a corner. Lyra sat down, pulling the coat tightly around her. "Will they come here?" she asked. Daniel crouched down in front of her, meeting her eyes. "They'll try," he admitted. "But I'll be ready." For a moment, they sat in silence, listening to the sound of water and the occasional cry of a distant gull. Daniel's mind was already working, thinking of how to get her out of the city completely. But before he could speak, a faint noise caught his attention, a soft scrape outside the building. He motioned for Lyra to stay quiet, moving silently. He peered through a gap in the wall. Two shadows moved past the broken fence, heading straight for the door. "They're here," Daniel whispered. Lyra's eyes filled with fear. "What do we do?" she breathed. Daniel scanned the room quickly. Spotting an old service hatch at the far end, he pointed to it. "Go now," he said. She hesitated, but the sound of the door creaking open pushed her into motion. They slipped through the hatch. Just as footsteps echoed inside the building, crouching low, they moved along the side of the docks. Staying hidden in the shadows, Daniel led her to a narrow path between two warehouses. Only when they were far enough away did they stop to catch their breath. Lyra looked at him with wide eyes. "They'll never stop, will they?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "Not unless we make them," he said, his voice low and determined. He looked toward the city skyline, the neon lights flickering in the distance. "It's time we stop running and face them." The wind at the docks carried the smell of salt and metal. The wooden planks creaked under their feet as Daniel led Lyra away from the open streets. Her small frame shivered under his coat, but her eyes stayed fixed on him, like he was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. They had been moving for hours, weaving through alleys and forgotten pathways until the city's noise faded behind them. Now they stood before a rusted building at the very edge of the docks, where the water slapped against stone walls in slow, heavy waves. Daniel pushed open the door, the hinges groaning. Inside, the air was stale, carrying the scent of dust and oil. It was an old warehouse, empty, except for a few crates stacked against the far wall. "This will be safe," Daniel said, scanning the shadows for movement. "No one comes here anymore." Lyra stepped inside cautiously, her bare feet making no sound on the cold floor. She turned a slow circle, taking in the dim space. "It's quiet," she said softly. "That's the point," Daniel replied. Closing the door behind them, he set the small bag on a crate and began unpacking it. A blanket, some food, and a small canister of water. Lyra watched him work, her hands twisting the edge of his coat. "You've been helping me all this time," she said suddenly. "Why?" Daniel froze for a moment before answering. "Because once, I lost someone I couldn't protect." He didn't look at her when he said it, but his voice carried the weight of years. Lyra tilted her head. "Your daughter." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Yes," he said simply. "A long time ago." The words hung in the air. For a moment, Lyra said nothing. Then she stepped closer and placed her small hand on his. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Daniel looked down at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. "You don't have to be sorry," he said. "You just have to be safe." They spent the next hour making a corner of the warehouse livable. Daniel spread the blanket on a flat crate so it wouldn't touch the damp floor. Lyra sat on it, pulling her knees up under the coat from time to time. She glanced toward the door as if expecting it to burst open. "You don't have to be afraid here," Daniel said. She gave him a faint smile, but her eyes still carried doubt. The sound of distant footsteps broke the silence. Daniel's head snapped toward the window. It was faint, but someone was moving along the docks. He motioned for Lyra to stay still. Creeping toward the broken window, he peered out. Two shapes moved in the fog too far to see clearly, but close enough to make his stomach tighten. "They're still looking," he murmured. Lyra's voice trembled. "They won't stop until I'm back with her." Daniel turned to her, his eyes steady. "Then we make sure you never go back." He moved quickly, grabbing the blanket and wrapping it around her. "We have to be ready to leave again." He said, "But I thought this was safe," she said, her voice small. "It is." For a little while he replied, "But safe places don't stay safe forever." They crouched in the shadows by the door, listening. The footsteps outside faded, replaced by the sound of the tide and the groan of wooden beams. For now, whoever had been searching was gone. Daniel relaxed slightly. But his mind was still working. He needed a long-term solution. Running from street to street wasn't enough. He had to make it so no one could claim her ever again. Lyra broke the silence. "Daniel, if I stay with you, will you really be my dad?" Her voice was small, but there was a raw hope in it. Daniel met her gaze. "Yes," he said. "If you want me to be." A faint smile touched her lips. "I do," she whispered. Then, almost shyly, she added, "I'll be good. I won't misbehave." The words hit him the same way they had the first night. He reached out and rested a hand on her shoulder. "Kid, you don't have to promise me that," he said. "You just have to be yourself." They shared a quiet moment before the sound of something scraping against the warehouse wall made them both tense. Daniel moved silently to the side of the door, his hand resting on the old metal latch. He waited, listening. The scraping stopped, replaced by a slow, deliberate knock. "Open up, human," a cold voice called. "You know we'll find her no matter where you hide." Lyra froze, her eyes wide. Daniel didn't answer. After a long pause, the voice laughed and faded into the distance. But the message was clear: they weren't giving up. When the silence returned, Daniel sat back on the crate. "We can't keep hiding," he said finally. Lyra looked at him nervously. "What else can we do?" He glanced toward the dark city skyline beyond the window. "We fight," he said simply, "not with weapons, but with the law." Lyra tilted her head, confused. "What do you mean?" Daniel's eyes hardened with determination. "I mean, I'm going to make it legal so she can never take you again." The morning fog clung to the docks like a heavy blanket. Daniel had barely slept, his mind racing with plans and dangers. Lyra dozed lightly on the crate bed, her head resting on the folded coat. Every small sound outside made her stir. Daniel knew they couldn't stay here another night. He packed their few supplies quickly. "We're leaving," he said softly. Lyra sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Where?" "To end this," Daniel replied. "We're going to her stepmother." Her eyes widened in shock. "No." "She hurt you." Daniel shook his head. "She's not going to hurt either of us." They stepped out into the fog-covered streets, moving quickly along narrow lanes. Daniel kept scanning the shadows. Lyra stayed close beside him, clutching the strap of the small bag. The city seemed quieter than usual, but he could feel the eyes on them. It was like walking through a web where every step might trip an alarm. They were halfway to the main road when a shout rang out behind them. "There they are." Daniel spun around. Two enforcers burst out of an alley, their boots pounding against the wet ground. "Run," Daniel ordered, grabbing Lyra's hand. They dashed through the twisting streets. Lyra's small feet slapped against the stone, her breaths coming fast and shallow. The enforcers were faster than he'd hoped. Their heavy steps closing in, Daniel yanked her into a side street. Weaving through crates and market stalls, merchants shouted angrily as they knocked over baskets. A fruit and cloth, a barrel rolled into the path behind them, slowing the pursuers for only a moment. "This way," Daniel urged, pulling her toward a narrow gap between two buildings. They squeezed through, scraping against rough walls. Lyra gasped as the sound of boots echoed even closer. They emerged onto a wider street to open, too exposed. Daniel spotted a cargo cart ahead and darted toward it. "Climb in," he ordered, boosting her up before jumping in himself. They ducked under a heavy tarp. The cart jolted as it began to move. The driver unaware of his extra passengers. Through a gap, Daniel watched the enforcers run past, scanning the street. He kept his arm around Lyra, feeling her trembling. "They'll come back," she whispered. "I know," he said. "That's why we're not stopping." The cart carried them halfway across the city before Daniel decided it was safe to jump off. They landed in a quiet district where the streets were lined with old stone houses. From here, the stepmother's mansion wasn't far. Daniel could see the high metal gates in the distance. Lyra slowed her steps, her eyes fixed on that place. Memories of being dragged inside and locked away flashed in her mind. "Daniel, I can't go back there," she said, her voice breaking. "You're not going back," he said firmly. "We're just going to talk in. I'll make sure you never have to see her again." As they approached, the gates swung open. The stepmother stood there in a rich cloak, her eyes sharp and cold. "Well," she said with a thin smile, "the little pest returns." And with a human, Daniel stepped in front of Lyra. "She's not yours anymore," he said. The stepmother laughed. "You think you can take her from me? The law is clear she's mine." Daniel's voice didn't waver. "Not when the law says a guardian can't abandon a child and then claim them back." Her smile faltered for a second. "You have no proof," she said quickly. Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out a small recording device. Her own voice played cold and cruel, saying she wanted the girl gone. Lyra's eyes widened. She hadn't known he had that. The stepmother's face twisted with anger. "You'll regret this, human," she hissed. Daniel shook his head. "No. You will, if you come near her again." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the stepmother stepped back and slammed the gate shut. Daniel turned to Lyra. "It's over," he said quietly. But even as they walked away, he glanced over his shoulder. Somehow he knew this wasn't the last time they'd have to look over their backs. They moved quickly through the quieter streets, the fog beginning to lift. The city was waking fully, now vendors calling out, children running in the streets for the first time in days. Lyra felt her shoulders loosen just a little. She looked up at Daniel. "Are we going home?" He smiled faintly. "Yes," he said. Home, but deep down, Daniel knew the stepmother's pride had been wounded. And people like her never stayed quiet for long. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the city streets. Daniel and Lyra walked side by side, the day's tension slowly melting into the cool evening air. They had left the stepmother's mansion behind, but the echo of her cold voice still lingered in Lyra's mind. She kept glancing back, as if the gates might open again and the enforcers would come charging out. Daniel noticed and gave her shoulder a light squeeze. "She can't touch you now," he said firmly. "Not after today." They stopped at a small corner shop. Daniel bought bread, fruit, and a steaming pot of broth to take home. The shopkeeper, an elderly alien with kind eyes, looked at Lyra curiously. "This your daughter?" he asked. Daniel didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said, "she is." The words sent a warmth through Lyra's chest that she had never felt before. Back at Daniel's home, the door closed with a familiar click. The warmth of the small living room wrapped around them. Lyra slipped off his coat and sat on the couch, watching him move around the kitchen for the first time since they met. She allowed herself to relax fully. The food smelled rich and comforting. Her stomach growled, making Daniel chuckle. "You'll eat as much as you want tonight," he said. She smiled faintly. "That sounds nice." After dinner, Daniel sat across from her with a small bundle of papers. "What's that?" she asked, tilting her head. "Something to make it official," he replied. Sliding the papers toward her, Their adoption forms human and alien law. Her eyes widened. You want to adopt me. I already think of you as mine, he said softly. This just makes it real in the eyes of the law. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her throat tightened, and tears pricked her eyes. No one's ever wanted me before, she whispered. Daniel leaned forward. That's their loss, he said. But my gain. Her hands trembled as she touched the papers. Will this mean I can stay here forever? Yes, he said. No one, not even your stepmother, can take you away once this is done. The next morning, they went to the city records office. The building was tall and cold. With long lines and quiet voices, Lyra stayed close to Daniel's side as they waited. When their turn came, a clerk scanned the forms and looked at Lyra. Do you agree to this adoption? The clerk asked. Lyra nodded quickly. Yes, she said with more confidence than she expected. The clerk stamped the papers with a heavy thud. It's done, he said simply. Walking out of the office, Lyra felt lighter. The streets seemed brighter, the air warmer. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. Welcome home, kid, he said. She grinned. Thanks, Dad. The word felt new on her tongue, but it fit perfectly that night. Daniel gave her a small room of her own. It had a narrow bed, a shelf for books, and a small window looking out at the street. Lyra ran her fingers over the blanket, the smooth wooden frame. It's mine, she asked, as if she still couldn't believe it. All yours, Daniel said, leaning in the doorway. She sat on the bed, her smile growing. I never had a room before, she said softly. Then this is the first of many things you'll have, he replied. Over the next week, life settled into something steady. They shared meals, walked the market together, and Daniel taught her how to read some human words. The tension in her shoulders eased bit by bit. She even began laughing. Against something Daniel had never heard from her before. It was small at first, but it grew each day. One evening, as the rain pattered softly against the window, Daniel sat reading while Lyra worked on a puzzle at the table. The sound of boots outside made him glance toward the door. Lyra noticed too, her eyes narrowing. Daniel stood and opened it just enough to see. A shadow moved away into the fog, too far to identify. He closed the door and locked it. They might still be watching, he said quietly. Lyra's smile didn't fade. Let them watch, she said. I'm not afraid now. Not with you here. Later that night, as she curled up in bed, Lyra called softly from her room. Dad. Daniel leaned against the doorway. Yeah. Thank you, she said simply. For what? He asked. For stopping. That night, she replied, for not walking past. Daniel's eyes softened. Always, kid, he said. Always. The rain fell steady outside, but inside, the small home was warm. Lyra drifted to sleep, knowing that, for the first time in her life, she had a place where she belonged. And no matter what shadows lingered in the streets, she wasn't alone anymore.